In 1970, the median American home cost about $23,000. Today, it's over $400,000. But here's the strange part. Median household income didn't collapse during that time. In fact, it rose. Adjusted for inflation, Americans today technically earn more than their grandparents did. More income, more technology, more productivity. And yet, a growing number of households feel like something essential is slipping out of reach. Rent consumes half a paycheck in many cities. Groceries feel heavier every month. Even a used car can cost as much as a new one did a decade ago. So the question keeps resurfacing. If Americans are earning more money than before, why does it feel like that money buys less of the life people expected? Because when people talk about losing buying power, they usually mean something very specific. Not everything, just the things that define stability. Housing, healthcare, education, childcare, the pillars of middle-class life. But that still leaves a deeper puzzle. If inflation statistics already adjust for price increases, why does the gap between income and everyday reality keep widening? And more importantly, what exactly changed in the system that made this possible? The obvious explanation is inflation. Most people assume the story is simple. Prices rise. Money buys less. That's the whole mechanism. Inflation happens when too much money chases too few goods. Governments spend more. Central banks print more. Demand rises faster than supply. Over time, prices adjust upward. That logic isn't wrong. In fact, inflation did surge in the 1970s. And again briefly after the pandemic. Gas became expensive. Food prices jumped. Interest rates moved. For short periods, inflation clearly erodes purchasing power. But something about this explanation stops short. Because if inflation alone explained the problem, then the relationship would be temporary. Prices spike. Wages eventually catch up. Stability returns. Historically, that cycle often happened. Yet over the last 4 decades, a different pattern quietly emerged. Some prices stabilized. Televisions became cheaper. Computers became cheaper. Air travel in many cases became cheaper. But the costs that shape long-term security moved in the opposite direction. Housing rose faster than wages. Healthcare rose faster than wages. College tuition rose far faster than wages. Inflation alone can't explain why the same categories keep separating from income again and again. That explains the moment, not the pattern. And once you start looking for the pattern, another detail appears. Because the economy didn't just experience inflation, it experienced a structural shift. And that's where the pattern changes. To see the shift, you have to step back to the late 1970s. The United States wasn't just dealing with inflation. It was dealing with a transformation in how the entire financial system worked. Interest rates surged. Global capital markets expanded. And something new began happening to everyday necessities. They slowly became financial assets. Homes were the first major example. For most of the 20th century, a house was primarily shelter. A place to live, a place to raise a family. But once mortgage markets expanded and credit became easier to access, housing started behaving differently. Not just shelter, an investment. Prices didn't just follow construction costs anymore. They began responding to credit availability. Lower interest rates meant buyers could borrow more. And when buyers could borrow more, prices adjusted upward. That didn't happen once, it became a pattern. Across decades, whenever credit conditions loosened, housing prices accelerated faster than income. But housing wasn't the only sector shifting. College education followed a similar path. Once student loans expanded in the 1990s and 2000s, universities gained access to a much larger stream of guaranteed financing. Tuition didn't simply reflect operating costs anymore. It began to reflect the borrowing capacity of students. Healthcare saw its own version of this shift. Insurance systems, hospital consolidation, and complex billing structures turned medical services into one of the most financially insulated sectors of the economy. The pattern was subtle. Everywhere credit expanded, certain essential services became detached from wage growth, which reframes the original question. If Americans feel like their money buys less stability, is it really because wages stopped growing? Or because the most important parts of life started pricing themselves against credit instead of income? And that's the moment the mechanism becomes clearer. It wasn't inflation, it was assetization. Once something becomes an asset, it follows a different logic. A product is priced against cost and income, an asset is priced against capital. That distinction quietly reshaped several pillars of the American economy. Take housing again. When a home functions as shelter, its price tends to track local wages and construction costs. But once housing becomes a financial asset, a new force enters the equation: credit. If buyers can borrow more, they can bid more. And when millions of buyers gain access to larger mortgages at the same time, prices adjust upward across the entire market. It's not just individual demand, it's system-wide purchasing power created by finance. That shift changes who sets the price, not the person earning a paycheck, the person accessing capital. And once housing begins behaving like an asset, it attracts a different class of participant: institutional investors, private equity, large-scale landlords. Housing becomes part of portfolio allocation, not just neighborhood supply. The same pattern appears in other sectors. Universities price tuition against the availability of federal student loans. Healthcare pricing expands inside a system where insurance buffers the immediate cost to patients. The consumer rarely pays the full price directly, but the system absorbs more capital each year, which creates a reinforcing loop. If X depends on Y, and Y depends on Z, then stabilizing Z requires protecting X. Housing stability depends on mortgage markets. Mortgage markets depend on rising asset values. So protecting the financial system increasingly means protecting high asset prices. No single decision created that structure, but once it formed, it began sustaining itself. And this leads back to the original question: are Americans losing buying power? Or is buying power slowly shifting toward the side of the economy connected to capital rather than wages? The system didn't make housing expensive, it made leverage powerful. So the question at the beginning starts to look different. Are Americans losing buying power? Or are they measuring their income against prices that no longer respond to income at all? Because once housing, education, and healthcare behave like financial assets, the benchmark shifts. Prices begin reacting to credit conditions, investment demand, and capital flows, not just paychecks. And that creates a quiet tension inside the middle class. For decades, the cultural expectation remained the same: work, earn more over time, afford stability. But the system underneath that expectation slowly changed. Income continued to determine everyday consumption, but long-term security started responding to capital markets. Homes priced against mortgage capacity, college priced against student debt availability, healthcare priced inside insurance networks absorbing expanding costs. None of this required a conspiracy. No single policymaker decided the outcome. But once these sectors connected themselves to large, scalable financing systems, the pricing gravity changed. And gravity is hard to reverse. Which means the experience many Americans describe today isn't just about inflation. It's about the mismatch between two measurement systems. Wages still measure work, but the foundations of stability increasingly measure access to capital. So when people ask whether Americans are losing buying power, the deeper tension may be this: the dollar didn't suddenly lose value. The definition of what a dollar needs to buy quietly moved somewhere else. And once an economy begins pricing stability through financial assets instead of wages, the real question becomes harder. Not how much people earn, but which system their income is competing against.